Hey there, night dwellers. As the shadows creep in and silence wraps around you like a cold blanket, I invite you to settle in. Whether you're here for a scare, before bed, or just passing time in the dark, I want to know, where are you watching from, and what gives you the chills? Drop a comment below, and if you're brave enough to make it through the whole tale, give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that crawl under your skin. Now, turn off the lights, grab your blanket tight, and listen closely. Tonight's nightmare begins. Story 1. I need to share something that happened to me 3 years ago. Something that still makes me check all my locks twice before bed and never, ever stay home alone for more than a day. I've told this story to a few close friends, but most people think I'm exaggerating or making it up entirely. I'm not. Every word of this is true. My name is Jessica, and at the time this happened, I was 23 years old, fresh out of college, and living in my childhood home while I saved money for my own place. My parents had always been protective, maybe overly so, but they'd finally reached the point where they trusted me to stay home alone for extended periods. When they told me they were planning a 2-week European vacation for their 25th anniversary, I was actually excited. 2 weeks of complete freedom. No curfew, no questions about where I was going or who I was with. I could finally feel like a real adult in my own space. The house I grew up in is pretty typical for our suburban neighborhood. It's a 2-story colonial built in the 1980s, sitting on about half an acre with woods backing up to our property. We have good neighbors, low crime rates, and I'd never felt unsafe there in my entire life. My parents left on a Saturday morning in late September. They'd left me detailed instructions about everything from watering the plants to which neighbors to call in case of emergency. They'd stocked the fridge, left cash for groceries, and made me promise to call them every other day to check in. The first few days were exactly what I'd hoped for. I stayed up late watching movies, ate ice cream for breakfast, had friends over without having to ask permission. It was perfect. I felt independent and mature, like I was finally ready to be on my own. But on Wednesday night, something shifted. I was in the living room around 11 p.m., channel surfing and eating leftover pizza, when I heard something that made me pause. It sounded like footsteps on the gravel driveway. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was walking very carefully to avoid making too much noise. I muted the TV and listened. Our driveway is long and curves around some trees, so you can't see the road from the house. The footsteps continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I waited for a car door to slam, for a doorbell ring, for something that would explain why someone was walking up our driveway at 11 p.m. Nothing came. After about 5 minutes, I convinced myself it was probably just an animal. We get deer in our yard all the time, and maybe one had wandered onto the driveway. I turned the TV volume back up and tried to focus on the late-night comedy show I'd been watching. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. You know that primitive instinct that tells you when you're being watched? I had that feeling, but amplified to an almost unbearable level. I got up and went to the front window, being careful to stay to the side where I couldn't be seen from outside. I peered through the curtains, scanning the driveway and front yard. Nothing looked out of place. Our motion sensor lights hadn't even activated. I checked all the doors and windows on the first floor, making sure everything was locked. They were. I set the alarm system like my parents had taught me and went to bed, telling myself I was just being paranoid because I wasn't used to being alone in such a big house. Thursday passed normally. I had a job interview in the morning, met some friends for lunch, and spent the afternoon cleaning the house. But as evening approached, I found myself getting anxious again. I kept looking out windows, checking the alarm system, and jumping at every small sound. Around 9 p.m., I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard it again. Footsteps on gravel. This time, I was sure they weren't animal footsteps. They had a rhythm, a purpose that only human movement could have. I immediately turned off all the lights on the first floor and crept to the front window. The footsteps had stopped again, but now I could see something that made my blood run cold. At the edge of our driveway, just barely visible in the dim light from the street lamp, was a figure. A person standing perfectly still, facing our house. I couldn't make out any details, height, gender, clothing, because they were just outside the range of clear visibility, but they were definitely there. I watched for at least 10 minutes. The figure never moved, never shifted position, just stood there, staring at our house. Then, as suddenly as I'd noticed them, they were gone. I blinked, and the spot where they'd been standing was empty. I called the police immediately. I told them someone was lurking around my property, and they said they'd send a patrol car to check the area. The officer arrived about 20 minutes later, searched our yard and the surrounding area with a flashlight, and found nothing unusual. He was kind but clearly thought I was a young woman letting her imagination run wild. He gave me his card and told me to call if I saw anything else, but I could tell he wasn't taking it seriously. That night, I barely slept. Every sound the house made, and old houses make a lot of sounds, had me sitting up in bed, straining to listen. I kept the alarm system on and my phone next to my pillow. Friday started normally enough. I had convinced myself that maybe the officer was right. Maybe I had just been spooked by shadows or a neighbor walking their dog. I spent the day running errands and trying to enjoy my remaining week of freedom. But Friday night, everything escalated. I was upstairs in my bedroom around 10 p.m. when I heard something that made my heart stop. The front doorknob was rattling, not like someone knocking or ringing the doorbell, but like someone was gently testing to see if the door was locked. I grabbed my phone and crept to my bedroom window, which gives a partial view of the front porch. The porch light was on and I could see the front door clearly. No one was there, but the doorknob was definitely moving. I called 911 again. This time I was crying and could barely get the words out. The dispatcher kept me on the line while sending officers to my location. She told me to stay upstairs and away from windows. The rattling stopped before the police arrived. When they got there, they searched the entire property thoroughly. They found something that convinced them I wasn't imagining things. Fresh footprints in the flower bed under the front windows. Footprints that definitely hadn't been there when I'd watered the plants that morning. The officers took pictures of the prints and filed a report. They also walked through the house with me, checking every room, every lock, every window. Everything was secure. They recommended I stay with friends or family until my parents returned, but I stubbornly refused. This was my house, and I wasn't going to be driven out of it by some creep. Saturday was when things got truly terrifying. I'd spent the day with friends, deliberately staying out late so I wouldn't have to be in the house alone for very long before bed. I got home around midnight, pulled into the garage, and locked it behind me as I always did. As I was walking through the garage toward the door that led into the kitchen, I heard something that froze me in place. It was coming from inside the house, a sound like someone walking around on the first floor. Heavy, slow footsteps. Definitely not the settling of the house or any other explanation I could rationalize. Someone was in my house. I stood in the garage, trembling, trying to figure out what to do. My car keys were still in my hand. I could get back in the car and drive away, but then what? Call the police from somewhere else and wait for them to arrive while this person did who knows what in my house. Instead, I did something incredibly stupid. I decided to listen more carefully, to try to figure out exactly where the sounds were coming from and what this person might be doing. I put my ear to the door, leading from the garage to the kitchen. The footsteps were definitely on the first floor, and they seemed to be moving in a pattern, like someone was walking from room to room, slowly and methodically. What made it even more terrifying was the rhythm. The footsteps weren't rushed or frantic like you'd expect from a burglar trying to get in and out quickly. They were calm, deliberate, like whoever was in there belonged there, like they were comfortable. I called 911 for the third time. The dispatcher recognized my address immediately. She told me to stay in the garage and not attempt to enter the house under any circumstances. Police were en route. The footsteps continued the entire time I was waiting in the garage, just slow, steady walking from room to room. Occasionally they would pause for a few minutes, then start again. When the police arrived, they found all the doors and windows still locked from the inside. The alarm system was still armed and hadn't detected any breach. But when they entered the house, They found clear evidence that someone had been inside. Lights were on in rooms I knew I'd left dark. Cabinet doors in the kitchen were open. Books on the living room shelf had been moved around. Most disturbing of all, someone had been sitting on my parents' bed. There was a clear indentation in the comforter. But whoever had been in the house was gone. The police searched every room, every closet, the basement, the attic. No one was there. How had someone gotten inside a locked house with an armed security system? How had they left without triggering any alarms or alerts? The police were as baffled as I was. They dusted for fingerprints but found nothing conclusive. They suggested changing all the locks and upgrading the security system. Most importantly, they strongly recommended I not stay in the house alone anymore. This time, I listened. I called my aunt, who lived about an hour away, and asked if I could stay with her until my parents returned. I packed a bag that night and left, not even caring about seeming weak or cowardly anymore. But the story doesn't end there. On Sunday, my aunt convinced me to go back to the house to get more of my things and to check on everything. We went together in the middle of the afternoon, thinking surely nothing could happen in broad daylight with both of us there. The house looked normal from the outside. We used my key to get in, and everything seemed fine at first. But as we were gathering my things from upstairs, my aunt called out to me from the hallway. "Jessica, you need to see this." She was standing in front of the linen closet, staring at something inside. When I joined her, I saw what had caught her attention. All the towels and sheets had been removed from the shelves and were neatly laid out on the hallway floor, arranged in a perfect rectangle like someone had made a bed on the floor. We hadn't done that, and it definitely hadn't been there when the police searched the house 2 nights before. My aunt immediately called the police while I took pictures with my phone. I also called the security company to ask if there had been any alerts since Friday night. There hadn't been. According to their system, no doors or windows had been opened. No motion had been detected inside the house. The police arrived and documented everything, but they had no more answers than before. They recommended we change the security company and install additional cameras throughout the house. That's when my aunt made a suggestion that I initially thought was crazy, but ended up being crucial. She said we should check if there were any hidden spaces in the house that we didn't know about. Places where someone could hide and access the house without triggering normal entry points. We contacted a contractor who specialized in home inspections. He came out on Monday and did a thorough examination of the entire house, looking for any anomalies in the structure. What he found changed everything. In the basement, behind a panel that looked like part of the wall, there was a small access tunnel that led to a crawl space running under most of the first floor. The tunnel connected to an old drain pipe that led outside to a drainage ditch behind our property. The pipe was just large enough for a person to crawl through, and it had clearly been used recently. There were fresh scuff marks and even some fabric fibers caught on the rough edges. Someone had been using this tunnel to get into our house. They could access our basement through this pipe, climb up into the crawl space, and get into the main house through a loose floorboard in the laundry room. They'd probably been doing it for weeks or even months without us knowing. When I lived there with my parents, they might have only come in when the house was empty during the day. But when I was alone, they'd gotten bolder. The contractor sealed the tunnel permanently, and we had additional security installed throughout the basement. But the discovery raised horrifying questions. How long had this person been coming into our house? What had they been doing while we slept upstairs? Unaware. Had they been watching us, learning our routines? When my parents returned from Europe, I told them everything. They were horrified and immediately hired a private security company to do a complete assessment of our property. We installed cameras everywhere, motion sensors in every room, and even got a guard dog. But I never felt safe in that house again. Every sound, every shadow made me paranoid. I moved out within 2 months and have never spent another night there alone. Here's the part that still keeps me awake sometimes. The police never caught whoever was doing this. After we sealed the tunnel, the incident stopped, but that person is still out there. They know where I grew up. They know the layout of my family's house. They know far too much about our lives. Sometimes I wonder if they've found another way in, or if they've moved on to terrorizing some other family. I think about other people who might be experiencing strange sounds in their houses, footsteps they can't explain, the feeling of being watched. I've learned that there are people out there who get some kind of thrill from invading others' privacy and space. They're not necessarily there to steal or to harm. They just want to be where they don't belong, to have access to lives that aren't theirs. The violation I felt was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just that someone had been in our house. It was that they'd been living alongside us in secret. They'd been close enough to watch us, to learn our habits, to know when we were vulnerable. Since then, I've never taken home security for granted. I always check for hidden access points when I move somewhere new. I have multiple security systems, cameras, alarms. Some people think I'm paranoid, but I know what it feels like to discover that your safe space isn't safe at all. I still live in the same city, but I've never felt completely secure since that experience. In crowded places, I sometimes think I see a familiar shadow, someone who seems to be watching me. It's probably just paranoia, but once you've been through something like this, you never really feel safe again. The worst part is not knowing who it was or why they chose our house. Was it random, or had they been watching our family for some specific reason? Were they someone we knew, or a complete stranger who'd somehow become obsessed with our lives? I'll never have those answers, but I learned that the monsters we worry about aren't always the ones that break down doors or shatter windows. Sometimes they're the ones who find ways to slip into your life without you ever knowing they're there. Sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what happens to you. It's what could have happened, what might have been happening all along without your knowledge. The idea that your privacy, your safety, your home could be violated in ways you never even considered. That 2-week period when I was home alone changed my entire perspective on personal security and safety. I realized how vulnerable we all are, how easy it can be for someone with bad intentions to access our lives if they're patient and clever enough. I'm sharing this story because I want people to be aware that these things can happen, that sometimes the bump in the night isn't just the house settling, and the feeling of being watched isn't just paranoia. Sometimes trusting your instincts can literally save your life. If you ever feel like something isn't right in your home, don't dismiss it. Check for things you might not have considered: old access points, crawl spaces, anywhere someone could hide or gain entry without using obvious entrances. And if you ever find yourself home alone for extended periods, be extra vigilant, have a plan for emergencies, stay in touch with friends and family, and never ignore signs that someone might be where they shouldn't be. I was lucky. Whoever was invading our house never escalated to actual confrontation or violence. But I know that not everyone who goes through something like this is so fortunate. The experience taught me that being alone doesn't just mean being by yourself. It means being responsible for your own safety in ways you might never have considered. It means being aware of threats you hoping you'll never have to face. 3 years later, I still think about that person sometimes, where they are now, whether they ever found another way into houses like mine, whether they ever graduated from secret invasion to something worse. I hope they've moved on to less harmful obsessions, but I also hope that by sharing this story, I can help other people recognize the signs of this kind of violation before it goes as far as it did for me. Your home should be your sanctuary. When that safety is compromised, it changes you in ways that last long after the immediate threat is gone. But surviving something like this also makes you stronger, more aware, more prepared to protect yourself and the people you care about. I'm not the same trusting person I was before this happened. That's both a loss and a gain. I've lost some innocence and peace of mind, but I've gained skills and awareness that will keep me safer for the rest of my life. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: trust your instincts, secure your home thoroughly, and never assume that being careful is being paranoid. Sometimes the things we're afraid of are exactly the things we should be afraid of. And sometimes, when you're home alone, you really aren't alone at all. Hey everyone, what I'm about to share with you happened about 4 years ago when I was working night shifts at Mountain View Hospital. I've been hesitating to talk about this for a long time because, honestly, I still can't explain what happened that night, and part of me still doesn't want to believe it was real. Before I get into it, I should mention that I've changed some names and specific details to protect privacy, but everything I'm about to tell you is exactly how I remember it happening. I started working as a nursing assistant at Mountain View in 2018. The hospital was pretty old, built in the 70s, and was this massive concrete structure with 5 floors. Some wings had been renovated, but the east wing of the 4th floor, where I usually worked, was still original and definitely showed its age. After about a year there, I switched to the night shift. The pay was better, and I was taking classes during the day, so it made sense. Night shifts ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I was usually assigned to monitor 8 to 10 patients. Most nights were pretty quiet. You'd do your rounds every couple hours, help patients who called, and handle any emergencies. But mostly it was just quiet, almost too quiet sometimes. That's when your mind starts playing tricks on you, or at least that's what I used to think. The night everything happened was in late November. It was one of those cold, rainy nights where the water hits the windows so hard it sounds like someone's throwing pebbles at the glass. I remember the weather, specifically because we had 3 call-ins that night. People didn't want to drive in the storm, I guess. So we were seriously understaffed. There were just 2 nurses and me covering the entire East Wing, about 30 patients. My supervisor, Linda, was apologetic but firm. Just prioritize. Emergency calls first, then comfort care. If you're overwhelmed, call for backup. The first few hours were chaotic. Call lights going off every few minutes, medications to distribute, patients needing help to the bathroom. By 2 a.m., things had finally settled down. Most patients were asleep, and I finally had a moment to breathe. I was at the nurses' station updating some charts when I heard a call from room 432. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman recovering from hip surgery, needed help to the bathroom. Routine stuff. When I got to room 432, Mrs. Peterson was fast asleep. Her call button was still in its holder on the wall, definitely not pressed. I checked her vitals just to be safe. All normal. Figuring it was a system glitch, I went back to the nurses' station. As soon as I sat down, the call light for room 432 went off again. Annoyed, thinking it was a wiring issue, I went back to check. Again, Mrs. Peterson was sound asleep. This time I inspected the call button more carefully. Everything seemed normal. I was about to leave when I noticed it was unusually cold in the room. The AC was definitely blasting harder than it should have been. I adjusted the thermostat and made a mental note to tell maintenance about both issues in the morning. That's when I heard what sounded like whispers coming from the bathroom. Thinking maybe another staff member was in there, I knocked on the bathroom door. No answer. The whispers stopped. I opened the door. Empty. Just an ordinary hospital bathroom. I remember standing there for a minute, wondering if I was just overtired. The bathroom was ice cold, even colder than the room. I closed the door and left, telling myself it was just the ventilation system making weird noises. Around 3 a.m., I was doing my rounds again when I noticed something odd. According to my charts, room 438 should have had a patient, a middle-aged man named David White, who'd been admitted that afternoon with pneumonia. But when I got to 438, the room was completely empty. The bed was made, looking untouched. I double-checked my notes, thinking I'd made a mistake. Nope, David White was definitely supposed to be in 438. I went to find Linda to ask about it. That's strange, she said, looking at the computer. System shows he's still admitted and in that room. Maybe they moved him for a procedure and forgot to update. We checked with the other floors. No one had Mr. White. Linda called the ER to see if he'd been transferred back down, but they hadn't seen him. She started to look worried. Let me check his file again, she said. Maybe there's something in his admission notes. While Linda was looking into it, I went back to continue my rounds. As I walked past room 432, Mrs. Peterson's room, I heard what sounded like a man's voice coming from inside. Thinking a family member might have somehow snuck in after visiting hours, I quietly opened the door to check. Mrs. Peterson was still asleep, No one else was visible in the room, but I distinctly heard a man say, "They took me to the old room." I felt the hair on my arms stand up. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I quickly checked the bathroom. Empty. Under the bed, nothing. I even looked in the closet. When I turned back toward Mrs. Peterson, I noticed her call button was now on the floor. I'm certain it was in the holder when I first came in. After finishing my rounds, I found Linda still trying to track down Mr. White. She looked frustrated. "This makes no sense," she said. "He was definitely admitted. Dr. Sharma saw him at 4 p.m. yesterday. Respiratory did a treatment at 6. Then, nothing. No more notes." "This is going to sound weird," I said, but when I was in Mrs. Peterson's room, I heard a man's voice say, "They took me to the old room." Linda gave me a strange look. "What old room?" That's when I remembered something. During my orientation, one of the older nurses had mentioned that before the last partial renovation, the East Wing had a different room numbering system. What was now the storage closet at the end of the hall used to be a patient room, room 440. "Do you think he could be talking about the old room 440? I asked. Linda shook her head. "That's been a storage closet for years. It doesn't even have a bed anymore. Still, something told me I needed to check." "I'm going to take a look anyway," I said. The storage closet was at the very end of the hall, past all the patient rooms. It was rarely used because it was so far from the nurse's station. As I approached, I noticed the door was slightly ajar, which was unusual since it was normally kept locked. I pushed the door open. The room was dark, with just a sliver of light coming in from the hallway. I felt around for the light switch and flipped it on. It wasn't a storage closet anymore. It was a fully set-up patient room. I stood frozen in the doorway. Where there should have been shelves of supplies and equipment, there was a hospital bed with monitors. The room looked off somehow. The machines were older models we didn't use anymore. The paint on the walls was a faded green color that the hospital had replaced years ago. And there, in the bed, was a man who matched the description of David White. I approached him slowly. "Mr. White?" I asked. "David?" He turned toward me, but something wasn't right. His movements were jerky, unnatural. His eyes looked glazed over. "They said this was my room now," he said in a flat voice. "Said I needed to be isolated." "Who said that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The doctor with the black eyes," he replied. I felt a chill run down my spine. I needed to get help. I turned to go find Linda, but as I reached for the door, it slammed shut. I tried the handle, locked. I started pounding on the door and shouting for help. Behind me, I heard Mr. White say in that same flat voice, "They don't like it when you try to leave." The lights began to flicker. In the brief moments of darkness, I thought I saw other figures in the room, shadowy forms standing in the corners. Between my pounding and yelling, I heard footsteps in the hallway. The door suddenly opened, and Linda stood there, looking confused. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Why are you making so much noise?" I turned to point at Mr. White, but the room was now just a storage closet again. Shelves of supplies, cleaning equipment, no bed, no patient. "He was here," I stammered. "David White was just here." The room was different. It was set up like a patient room. Linda looked concerned. "Maybe you should take a break," she said gently. "It's been a stressful night." I knew what I'd seen, but I also knew how it sounded. I reluctantly agreed to go to the break room for a few minutes. During my break, I couldn't shake what I'd seen. It felt too real to be a hallucination. I decided to do some digging. The hospital had a small archive room near administration where they kept older records. I'd been in there once before to find some paperwork, so I knew the code to get in. I shouldn't have been leaving my post, but I had to know if there was something about room 440. In the archive room, I found records organized by year. I went back to the 1970s when the hospital was first built. After some searching, I found a floor plan from 1978. Sure enough, what was now the storage closet was originally room 440. I dug deeper and found patient records from that era. In 1979, there were several incident reports filed about room 440. Patients reported seeing people in the corners and hearing whispers. One patient claimed a doctor with black eyes visited them in the night, but no doctor was on record as having been there. The most disturbing report was from a nurse who documented that a patient assigned to room 440 had gone missing for 12 hours. When they found him, he was disoriented and kept saying he'd been in the old hospital. After that incident, room 440 was converted to storage, and the room numbering in that section was changed. As I was putting the files back, I noticed a black and white staff photo from 1979. I recognized the building, the uniforms, but not the people, except one. Standing in the back row was a doctor I'd never seen before but who looked oddly familiar. According to the caption, his name was Dr. Everett Marsh. I took a picture of the photo with my phone and left the archive room, my mind racing. When I got back to the nurse's station, Linda was on the phone looking stressed. "He's back," she said as she hung up. "David White. They found him in the MRI room in the basement. He has no idea how he got there. Last thing he remembers is being in his room around 10 p.m. "Is he okay?" I asked. "Physically, yes, but he's agitated, talking nonsense. Keeps mentioning a doctor who visited him, a doctor not on our staff." "Did he say the doctor had black eyes?" I asked quietly. Linda's expression changed. "How did you know that?" I showed her the picture I'd taken of the old staff photo. "I think he might be talking about this doctor, Dr. Everett Marsh." Linda studied the photo. "That's impossible. This picture is from, what, the 70s? That doctor would be retired or dead by now." "I know," I said, "but I found some old incident reports about room 440. Weird things happened there, Linda. They stopped using it as a patient room because of it." Linda handed me back my phone. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Mr. White was probably sleepwalking or having some kind of reaction to his medication." But I could tell she was unsettled. "Where is he now?" I asked. "They're bringing him back up. Dr. Sharma's on his way in to examine him." She paused. The rest of the night was thankfully uneventful. Mr. White was settled into room 439 and seemed fine, if a bit confused about what had happened. Dr. Sharma chalked it up to a combination of fever and new medication. Around 5 a.m., I was helping a patient in room 435 when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Linda. "Need you at nurse's station ASAP." When I got there, she pointed to the security monitor. "Watch the hallway outside 432. On the grainy black and white footage, I could see the hallway was empty. Then a dark figure walked into frame. It looked like a man in a white coat, but something about his movements was off. Jerky, unnatural, like Mr. White had been in my hallucination. The figure stopped outside room 432, Mrs. Peterson's room, and seemed to stare directly at the camera before disappearing into the room. "That's not any of our doctors," Linda said. "I called security. They're reviewing the footage." I felt my blood run cold. "We need to check on Mrs. Peterson." We rushed to room 432 together. Mrs. Peterson was awake, looking frightened. "There was a doctor," she said as soon as we entered. "He came in and stood at the foot of my bed, just staring at me. When I asked what he wanted, he said he was looking for someone who belonged in the old room. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, and he left." "What did he look like?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Tall, thin, older gentleman. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his eyes..." She shuddered. His eyes were strange, like they were all black. Linda and I exchanged looks. "Did you happen to get his name?" Linda asked. Mrs. Peterson nodded. "He called himself Dr. Marsh. The day shift came in at 7 a.m., and I've never been so glad to see my replacement." Linda and I stayed an extra hour to brief security about what had happened. They were taking it seriously, reviewing all the camera footage from overnight. Instead of going home to sleep, I went to the local library. I needed to know more about Dr. Everett Marsh. The hospital's records hadn't given much information about him. The library had archives of local newspapers dating back decades. It took some time, but I finally found what I was looking for in an issue from 1980. Local doctor's mysterious disappearance remains unsolved. According to the article, Dr. Everett Marsh had vanished without a trace in December 1979. He was last seen working a night shift at Mountain View Hospital. The article mentioned rumors about Dr. Marsh conducting unauthorized research with patients, but nothing was ever proven. The case eventually went cold. A follow-up article from 1981 caught my attention. During a renovation of the hospital's East Wing, construction workers discovered a hidden room behind what was then room 440. The room contained medical equipment and journals that appeared to belong to Dr. Marsh. The journals reportedly contained disturbing content about experiments to open doorways between worlds. The hospital refused to comment, and the room was sealed up. I left the library with more questions than answers. If Dr. Marsh disappeared in 1979, who or what had visited Mrs. Peterson last night? I wasn't scheduled to work that night, but I swapped shifts with another assistant. I had to know more. When I arrived, the day shift briefed us on a strange occurrence. All the patients on the East Wing had reported having the same dream. They were in an old version of the hospital, being watched by a doctor with black eyes. Linda was on duty again. She pulled me aside before rounds. "Security found something on the cameras," she said in a hushed voice. "That figure we saw last night? It shows up on footage from the past month, always between 3 and 4 a.m., always near room 432. But here's the weird part. It never enters through doors. It just appears." "Did you tell administration?" I asked. "I tried. They think it's a camera glitch." She hesitated. "There's something else." I looked up Dr. Marsh in the old employee files. Before he disappeared, he was conducting a research study on what he called liminal consciousness, the state between sleep and wakefulness. He believed that in that state, people could perceive things from other realities. What kind of things? He doesn't specify, but his last notes mention a breakthrough. He wrote that he'd found a way to step through. That was the day before he disappeared. The implications made my skin crawl. You think he actually found a way to... what? Enter another dimension? Linda looked uncomfortable. I don't know, but every patient who's reported seeing him has been on strong pain medications. Medications that can cause that state between sleep and wakefulness. Around 3 a.m., I was near room 432 when the temperature suddenly dropped. My breath came out in white puffs and the lights flickered. Then I saw him, Dr. Marsh, at the end of the hallway. In the dim light, he looked almost normal, except for his eyes, completely black, like empty spaces. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the old storage closet, the former room 440. Against my better judgment, I followed. The door to the storage closet was open, but when I looked inside, it wasn't a closet anymore. It was a patient room again, but even more antiquated than what I'd seen before. Equipment from the 70s, green walls, old-style monitors. Dr. Marsh stood by the empty bed, his back to me. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. He turned slowly. Up close, his face looked wrong, too pale, features slightly blurred, as if I was seeing him through frosted glass. "To continue my work," he said. His voice echoed strangely, as if coming from far away. "I found a way through, but now I can't get back. I need a subject, someone to help me reverse the process." "What process?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. "Crossing over," he said. "I went too far, got trapped. This place, it's like our world, but not. A reflection. I've been trying to reach back through. The patients who see you are in the liminal state. They can perceive both sides." He moved closer. "I need someone to take my place so I can return." I backed toward the door. "I can't help you." His expression hardened. "You already have. You've opened the door wider just by acknowledging me, by believing." The lights flickered again, and in that brief darkness, Dr. Marsh moved with impossible speed. He was suddenly right in front of me, reaching for my arm. His touch was ice cold, sending pain shooting up my arm like frostbite. I screamed and pulled away, stumbling backward out of the room. As I fell into the hallway, the door slammed shut. Linda and a security guard came running. When they opened the door, it was just a storage closet again. "He was here," I said, clutching my arm. "Doctor Marsh was here." The security guard looked skeptical, but Linda noticed something. "Your arm," she said. "What happened?" Where Dr. Marsh had grabbed me, there was a handprint, the skin red and blistered as if burned by extreme cold. The hospital administration couldn't ignore what had happened after seeing my arm. They brought in a team of investigators who specialized in environmental anomalies to check the East Wing, particularly the old room 440. When they removed part of the back wall of the storage closet, they found exactly what the old newspaper had described, a hidden room. Inside were decaying journals and equipment. One journal contained Dr. Marsh's final entries, describing his belief that he had found a way to step sideways into what he called a parallel configuration of reality. His last entry simply read, "Tonight I will cross over. If successful, I will return with proof." The hospital decided to permanently seal off the storage closet and the hidden room behind it. They also relocated all patients from the East Wing until renovations could be completed to essentially rebuild that section. For weeks after the incident, I had nightmares about Dr. Marsh in them. He would always say the same thing: "You opened the door." Now part of you is here with me. I quit my job at Mountain View shortly after. I couldn't walk those halls anymore without feeling watched. I'd turn a corner and catch a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision, a tall figure in a white coat that would vanish when I tried to look directly at it. It's been 4 years since all this happened. I work at a different hospital now in the pediatric ward, and only day shifts. The nightmares have mostly stopped, but sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, in that space between wakefulness and dreaming, I feel a cold presence nearby. I'll open my eyes, and for just a split second, I'll see a figure standing in the corner of my room with eyes like black voids. The renovations at Mountain View were completed about a year after I left. They completely redesigned the East Wing, changing the layout so that there's no longer any space where room 440 used to be. I've kept in touch with Linda. She still works there. She says things have been normal since the renovation, but she refuses to work night shifts. I don't know if what happened was real or if we somehow all got caught up in some kind of mass hallucination, but I do know this: something was wrong in that hospital. Something connected to whatever Dr. Marsh did back in 1979. And sometimes, I still feel like part of me is trapped in that other place, that reflection he talked about. I've never told this story publicly before. Part of me is afraid that talking about it might somehow make it real again, might open the door wider, as Dr. Marsh said. But I also feel like people should know. If you're working night shifts, especially in an old hospital, and things start to feel off, sudden cold spots, equipment glitching, call buttons going off on their own, don't ignore it. Don't try to rationalize it away like I did at first. And if you ever see a doctor with eyes like empty space, whatever you do, don't follow him. Don't acknowledge him. And most importantly, don't let him touch you. Because some doors, once opened, are very hard to close again. Story 3. I'll try to keep this short, but there's a lot to unpack. Last month I was house-sitting for my aunt while she went on vacation to Europe. It's this big old house on the outskirts of town that's been in our family for decades. The kind of place with too many rooms and weird angles everywhere. I'd stayed there before when I was younger, so I knew my way around pretty well. The thing about this house is that there's this basement door in the kitchen that's always been locked. I mean always, like for as long as I can remember. When I was a kid, I asked my aunt about it once and she just said it was storage and that the stairs were too old and dangerous to use. Fair enough. I never really thought about it much after that, so I'm house-sitting, and everything's going fine for the first few days. I'm working from home during the day, watching Netflix at night, just enjoying having the whole place to myself. But on the fourth night, something weird happened. I was in the kitchen making a late dinner when I heard this sound. It was like someone walking around downstairs. Not footsteps exactly, more like shuffling or dragging something across the floor. At first I thought it might just be the house settling or maybe a pipe making noise, but it kept going for like 10 minutes. I stood there listening, trying to figure out what it could be. The sound was definitely coming from below the kitchen, which would be the basement, but that didn't make sense because the basement was supposed to be locked up and unused. After a while, the noise stopped. I finished making my food and tried to forget about it, but I kept glancing at that basement door. It looked the same as always. Old white paint that was peeling in some spots, with this ancient-looking brass doorknob that had probably been there since the 1960s. The next night it happened again. Same shuffling sound, same general area. This time I actually walked over to the basement door and pressed my ear against it. I could definitely hear something moving around down there. It sounded like someone was rearranging furniture or maybe boxes. I tried the doorknob, even though I knew it would be locked. It was. I shook it a few times, but the door was solid. Whatever was happening down there, I couldn't get to it from this entrance. That's when I remembered there might be another way in. The house has an outdoor entrance to the basement, one of those angled cellar doors you see on old houses. I'd never paid attention to it before, but I figured it was worth checking out. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The cellar door was around the back of the house, partially hidden by some overgrown bushes. When I got close to it, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The padlock that should have been securing it was lying on the ground, cut clean through. The door was slightly open. I stood there staring at it for a good 5 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Every instinct I had was telling me to go back inside and call my aunt, or maybe even the police. But another part of me was curious. I mean, if someone was breaking into the basement, shouldn't I find out who and why? I opened the cellar door wider and shined my flashlight down the stairs. They were concrete and looked sturdy enough, despite what my aunt had said about them being dangerous. I could see the bottom of the staircase and what looked like a typical unfinished basement. Concrete floor, exposed beams, that kind of thing. I went down. The basement was bigger than I expected. There were a few pieces of old furniture covered with sheets, some cardboard boxes stacked against the walls, and an old water heater in the corner. Nothing looked disturbed or out of place. No signs that anyone had been down there recently. But then I noticed something odd. There was a clear path through the dust on the floor, like someone had been walking the same route over and over again. The path led from the bottom of the stairs to the far wall, where I could see the other staircase that led up to the kitchen door. I followed the path and found something that made my blood run cold. At the base of the stairs leading to the kitchen, there was a small pile of what looked like food crumbs. Fresh crumbs. And next to them, a plastic water bottle that was still half full. Someone had been coming down here regularly, recently. I was about to head back upstairs when I heard the kitchen door creak open above me, footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming down toward me. I panicked. There was nowhere to hide in the basement. It was too open, too empty. I turned off my flashlight and crouched behind one of the covered pieces of furniture, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. In the darkness, I could barely make out a figure moving around the basement. They had their own flashlight, and I watched the beam dance across the walls as they moved. The beam stopped on the pile of crumbs where I'd been standing just moments before. I held my breath, trying not to make any noise. The figure stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then they started moving again, but not back up the stairs. They were walking toward my hiding spot. The flashlight beam got closer and closer. I could hear the footsteps right next to me now. I closed my eyes and waited for them to find me, but then the footsteps moved away. I opened my eyes and saw the light moving toward the cellar door stairs. I waited until I heard the footsteps reach the top before I moved. I crept over to where the figure had been standing and looked around. On the floor, exactly where they'd been, was a fresh apple core and an empty sandwich wrapper. This person wasn't just breaking into the basement, they were living here. I got out of there as fast as I could, running up the cellar door stairs and back into the house. I locked every door and window I could find and called the police immediately. When they arrived, they searched the entire house and basement but found nothing. No signs of forced entry from inside. No evidence that anyone had been living in the basement. The officer said it was possible that a transient had been using the space temporarily and had moved on. But here's what really bothered me. When the police checked the kitchen door to the basement, it was still locked from the inside. The keyhole showed no signs of tampering, and my aunt had the only key with her in Europe. So how had someone been getting from the basement into the kitchen to leave those crumbs? And more importantly, if that door was locked from the inside, how had they gotten out? I called my aunt the next day and told her what happened. She listened to everything, then went quiet for a long time. Finally, she said something that made my skin crawl. I should have told you about him. Told me about who? My brother lived in that basement for 3 years back in the 70s. After he came back from Vietnam, he couldn't handle being around people. He'd only come upstairs late at night to get food. We had to install that lock because he wouldn't stop wandering through the house. What happened to him? Another long pause. He died down there. Heart attack. We found him at the bottom of those stairs a week later. I moved out the next day. I don't care if that makes me a coward. My aunt never mentioned anything about needing to unlock that door when she got back from her trip, but she did mention that the cellar door padlock was found unlocked again, and there were fresh crumbs on the basement stairs. Sometimes houses keep their secrets, even after everyone thinks those secrets are buried. This happened about 3 months ago when I was staying at my older brother Jake's apartment while he was out of town for work. He lives in this converted warehouse downtown, one of those trendy loft spaces with exposed brick walls and way too much open space for one person. I was between apartments at the time, so crashing there for a week seemed perfect. Jake's place has this long hallway that connects the living area to the bedroom. It's probably 15 feet long with white walls and hardwood floors that creak when you walk on them. About halfway down the hall, there's this massive antique mirror hanging on the left wall. The thing is probably 6 feet tall and has this ornate gold frame that looks like it came from some old mansion. Jake told me he found it at an estate sale and couldn't resist buying it, even though it barely fit in his car. The first couple nights there were totally normal. I slept on his couch, watched his Netflix, raided his fridge, standard house-sitting stuff. But on the third night, something weird started happening. I have this habit of getting up around 2 or 3 in the morning to use the bathroom. I'm a light sleeper, and once I'm awake, I'm usually awake for good. So that night, I got up from the couch and started walking down the hallway toward the bathroom at the far end. As I passed the mirror, I caught a glimpse of my reflection out of the corner of my eye. Nothing unusual about that, except my reflection wasn't moving at the same time I was. I stopped dead in my tracks and looked directly at the mirror. My reflection was there, looking back at me, but it was like watching a delayed video feed. Every movement I made, my reflection would copy about a half second later, raise my hand, and a beat later, my reflection would raise its hand, turn my head, and my reflection would turn its head a moment after. I stood there for probably 5 minutes, moving different parts of my body and watching my reflection lag behind each time. It was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. I even tried moving really fast to see if I could confuse it somehow, but the delay was consistent every time. Eventually, I convinced myself I was just tired and seeing things. Old mirrors can play tricks on your eyes, especially in dim hallway lighting. I went to the bathroom, came back, and went to sleep without looking at the mirror again. The next morning, I tested it in full daylight. The mirror worked perfectly normal. No delay, no weird reflections, nothing out of the ordinary. I felt pretty stupid for freaking out over what was obviously just my imagination running wild in the middle of the night. But that night, it happened again. This time, I was more awake and definitely more alert. I walked down the hall specifically to test the mirror, and sure enough, There was that same half-second delay, but this time I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. When I smiled, my reflection didn't smile back. When I frowned, my reflection stayed neutral. It was copying my movements, but not my facial expressions. I tried different expressions, raised eyebrows, sticking out my tongue, even making weird faces. My reflection would mimic the movement of my head and the general gesture, but the facial expression was always just this blank, neutral stare. After a few minutes of this, I got really uncomfortable and headed back to the couch. As I was walking away, I looked over my shoulder one more time. My reflection was still there in the mirror, but it wasn't walking away. It was standing in the hallway, arms at its sides, just watching me go. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I called Jake to ask about the mirror. I tried to sound casual about it, just mentioning that it was a cool piece and asking where exactly he'd gotten it. He told me it came from an estate sale in an old Victorian house across town. The owner had died and her family was selling everything. Did the previous owner mention anything weird about it? I asked. Jake laughed. Weird how? It's just a mirror, dude. Why is it giving you the creeps? I almost told him about what I'd been seeing, but something stopped me. Instead, I just said it was such a statement piece that it made the hallway feel different. That night, I decided to avoid the hallway altogether. I used a water bottle instead of going to the bathroom and made sure to stay in the living room area. But around 3 a.m., I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps going back and forth, back and forth. I muted the TV and listened carefully. The footsteps would start from one end of the hall, walk to the other end, pause for a few seconds, then walk back. This went on for at least 10 minutes. The thing is, those footsteps sounded exactly like mine. Same weight, same rhythm, same slight squeak on the third floorboard from the bathroom door. I grabbed a baseball bat from Jake's closet and crept toward the hallway. As I got closer, the footsteps stopped. I peered around the corner and saw nothing. The hallway was empty, but somehow it felt like someone had just been there. I looked at the mirror from the doorway. In the reflection, I could see the entire hallway behind me, including myself holding the bat. Everything looked normal, but then I noticed something that made me drop the bat. In the mirror, there were wet footprints on the floor. Dark, wet footprints leading from one end of the hall to the other, like someone had been walking back and forth with wet feet. I spun around to look at the actual hallway floor. It was completely dry. I spent the rest of the night in my car in the parking lot outside the building. When Jake got back the next day, I was already packed and ready to leave. I told him I'd found another place to stay and thanked him for letting me crash there. He asked if everything was okay, and I just said the long commute to work was getting to me. I couldn't bring myself to tell him about the mirror. What would I even say? That his antique mirror was somehow showing a different version of reality? That my reflection had started living its own life? A few weeks later, Jake called me. He said he was thinking about getting rid of the mirror because it was giving him weird vibes. Apparently, he'd started noticing things too. Movements in his peripheral vision, the feeling that someone was watching him when he walked down the hall. The weirdest thing, he said, is sometimes I'll walk past it and see myself in the reflection, but I'll be doing something I'm not actually doing. Like yesterday, I saw myself in the mirror waving, but my hands were in my pockets. I told him he should definitely get rid of it. He said he already had a buyer lined up, some collector who specialized in antique mirrors and was paying way more than Jake had originally paid for it. I wanted to ask who the buyer was, wanted to warn them somehow, but I didn't know what I could possibly say. Hey, your new mirror might show you an alternate version of yourself? Good luck with that. Jake sold the mirror a week later. He says his apartment feels normal again, and he's sleeping better. Sometimes I wonder about whoever bought it, whether they're experiencing the same things we did. But mostly, I try not to think about it, because every now and then, when I'm walking past mirrors in my own place, I catch myself checking to make sure my reflection is doing exactly what I'm doing. So far it always is, but that half second of doubt never goes away.